Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. It's a perfect time to trim magnolias. Now, if you're doing Edith Bogue, which is an evergreen magnolia, what you're going to find is a lot of the young twiggy growth has not come through the winter. So make sure you go in and do some good, clean target pruning cuts. Don't leave stubs. And make sure that you do go in and get them out. Some of the Edith Bogues have actually left their old pods from the spent flowers on. And those branches I've noticed are actually dying. So it is a good idea to go in and trim out as many of those that are still there. Again, back to living tissue. So make sure that you're doing those and getting it cleaned up. They are coming into bloom, so the fragrance should be great. I'm also noticing that they're a little slower, and they may need an acidic plant food to green up the new growth. New growth is a little smaller than normal, but it is doing well. The old growth, though, is really thinning down, and it is still exfoliating. So that means it's basically going to keep only this year's growth. Normally it keeps this year's and last year's growth, and sheds everything else. So take a look at it. If your evergreen magnolias are in this state, make sure that you keep them watered through the heat and that you do give them an acidic plant food. For azaleas, rhododendrons, gardenias, blueberries, etc., will work very well on them. If you're looking at Elizabeth, which is a yellow magnolia, the leaves are slightly larger than normal in a normal year. This is probably because of our continual moist conditions. With the slightly larger leaves, they are growing very well, and they need to be shaped. Now, Elizabeth is actually a yellow and has a large sort of pyramidal shape. So trim to that and keep her in tight. Otherwise, what will happen, she'll become leggy and open, particularly in age. So it's better to start training her now and not wait until you have to do a renovation prune. The Leonard Messels are a pink star magnolia, and they need to be trimmed because they're making excessive amounts of growth. Don't know why, can't figure it out. It's not excessive fertilizer. It just seems to be that the conditions for this particular one is doing so well that it needs to be trimmed back quite hard to maintain size. Metasequoias have finally started to show robust growth. They showed growth earlier, but now they're actually growing well. This is an indicator that it's now time to trim. Normally, we would do that at, I would say probably the first 2 weeks of June, or at least in June. But this is early July, so they're a little late. So I want you to be a little judicious on your pruning. Don't excessively prune. They've recovered from a tough winter, and they're doing well, but go in and take out only what you need and for safety. Now, here's what I have a choice on. I have to cut down my hardy orange tree, which after 25 years has died. Now, I can cut it down, or I can cut it down and trim out the thorny branches. Now, when I cut it down, I can just cut it all up and get rid of it. Or I can go and trim out those thorny branches and paint the whole tree some pastel blue or orange or green or some purple or fuchsia, whatever color. Which do you think? Email me at openlinegardenShow@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. Should I just cut it all down? Should I cut it down and paint it a nice color and move it as an ornament somewhere in my garden? Or what? Other suggestions are also acceptable. Let's hear what you have to say. Daffodil leaves are turning brown, and the brown ones can be removed. Now, when I say brown, I don't mean the yellow and brown tips. I mean the entire leaf is actually brown and laying on the ground. They need to be removed. This sort of cleans up because they are slightly unsightly. Yes, unsightly. Daylilies are doing the same thing, I'm finding, so some of the older growth can also be removed. That is actually yellow and brown, so just clean it up, make it look good, because they are coming into bloom. So you don't want to reduce leaves, but the yellow and brown ones aren't of any use at all. My roses need to be deadheaded. So remember, when you're deadheading roses, you deadhead back to the first full leaflet growing in the direction that you want the plant to grow in. Roses grow after they bloom, and with each successive set of growth, you often will get another set of blooms. So it's important that you do continually deadhead your roses. Now, some roses just naturally self-clean, but in most cases, they are best to be deadheaded. The way to know, and the first full leaf, is that it will be either 5, 7, or 9 leaflets. Please don't use the old rule that if it's 7 or 9 leaflets, that has gone wild, because that just won't work. Particularly with the Multiflora understock, because they've sort of been a little more variant. The American understocks that they're using are definitely very, very variant as well. Your compost can be turned. We've had enough heat. It probably needs to be checked for temperature, and if the core temperature is dropped to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or less, it's time to turn your compost pile. So turn. And the faster and the more often you turn, you'll find your compost breaks down quicker. Your succulents and cactus can now be summered outdoors. Just watch for any excessive rainfall causing overwatering of them. So you may have to be able to pick up and move them in under cover so that they don't get overwatered. But they do love the sun, so let them establish themselves outdoors in semi-shade, and then you can later on move them out into full sun. Remember, some of them will discolor, we'll call it sunburn, and give you slightly different colors on the leaves. Jades are famous for giving a little bit of a pink or red edge on highlight growth outdoors. Okay, and it's a natural and normal thing. I've also noticed that in my garden, the next generation of dandelions that have blown in from the city park are sprouting everywhere, particularly right in the mulch. The mulch has been keeping everything nice and moist, and of course they think this is just a little bit of heaven. So you're going to have to go in and do a lot of shifting of the mulch around a little bit in order to kill off the sprouts, or to pull out some of the bigger ones as well. You want to make sure you get them before they go to seed. Remember, all that seed from the city parks are basically going to germinate, and if you open them up and disturb, you often will open up ground that they will then germinate in. When controlling weeds in turf, remember, cutting long, fertilizing well but not excessively, and watering will be probably one of your best weed controls, along with some hand weeding of some really particularly bad areas. These are important that you do get them quickly, as many of them are going to seed in the hot, dry weather that we're experiencing. So, watering. Every 5 to 7 days, you need 1 inch of moisture applied at one time. This is not sprinkle here, sprinkle there. It's applied once, watered deeply, and never in the evening if possible. What you want to do is make sure that the leaves of the grass are dry before sunset. So if you do have to water in the evening, make sure that it is at that time so that there is enough time to go and allow the leaves to dry. Otherwise, you're encouraging disease. If you over-fertilize, you encourage insect predation as well as disease. So don't excessive fertilize, but it is time to do a light summer feeding, particularly after all the rainfall we've had in the last few months. It's leached out a lot of the nitrogen. The plants are starting to show signs of less growth, and with less growth comes sort of poor color, etc. So go and give them a light summer feed. I've seen European chafers this past week, and actually for the past few weeks, in the trees at dusk and laying their eggs in our turf. So control right now is not good. Okay, remember that in the egg stage you can't control them. You have to wait until they develop into the grub stage. Remember that bugs such as robins, etc., and other foraging birds will actually eat both the adults as they're trying to lay eggs or after they've died laying eggs, but they'll also eat and go after any shallow grubs, not just your worms. So, things to do in the garden, and make sure that you look after yourself first. Cover up from the sun, big floppy hats, sunscreen, and gloves. Remember, protect yourself first. And have a great time in the garden. Don't forget to stop and admire your efforts. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.